It turns out to be a lower Earth Supreme in a semi-disabled state. Chen's soft chuckle, though faint, still echoed through the quiet, ruined hall. The mocking smile on Garuda's face seemed to freeze slightly at this moment, and then he tilted his head to look at Chen. A sarcastic smile then appeared on his lips. Have you already become so flustered that you're speaking incoherently? Garuda smiled slightly, his gaze filled with pity as he looked at Chen. Clearly, he interpreted Chen's unusual behavior as a sign of panic. After all, he could never have imagined that, within less than half a day, Chen had obtained a terrifying trump card that could rival a lower Earth Supreme. Beside Garuda, a man dressed in a black and white robe, exuding an aura of age, also lifted his eyes at this moment, his gaze indifferent as he looked at Chen. With his sharp eyes, he naturally saw through Chen's 9-cycle perfection strength at a glance. However, this didn't cause any ripple in his eyes. After all, given his usual status, a 9-cycle perfection was akin to an ant in his eyes. For a lower Earth Supreme to annihilate a 9-cycle perfection expert was almost as easy as turning the palm of one's hand, even if his strength was only at 50% of his peak. The disparity between a 9-cycle perfection and a lower Earth Supreme was so vast that it could leave one feeling utterly hopeless. Garuda, you may go. Since you have accepted the Palace Master's command, I will naturally not let a fly pass through here. The man called Elders was said, giving Chen a brief glance before turning to Garuda and speaking slowly. Upon hearing this, Garuda smiled lightly and nodded in acknowledgement, saying respectfully, in that case, I shall take my leave first. I was planning to search for the sacred artifacts left behind by the first hall master. With that, he stepped towards the door where Chen stood, and after a few steps, he was by Chen's side. He tilted his head slightly and smiled at Chen, saying, it's a bit of a pity that I originally wanted to have a real fight with you, but I didn't expect you to walk right into the trap we set for you. Don't worry, after you die, we will destroy your great Luo heaven domain, and the sacred demon palace will ensure they all join you. Garuda revealed his sharp white teeth, emitting a chilling aura. However, facing his cold, murderous intent, Chen only glanced at him, then smiled lightly and said, maybe we'll see each other next time. Next time? Garuda was momentarily stunned. Then his sarcastic smile grew more intense. He shook his head in pity. This guy was still hoping for another opportunity? How naive. It seemed that this dire situation had made Chen lose his usual calm, turning him into someone who was trying to act mysterious. With that thought, Garuda's delight grew even stronger. He no longer paid attention to Chen, brushing past him and stepping out of the ruined hall, heading off to search for the sacred artifacts left by the first hall master. As Garuda left, Chen made no move to stop him. His main opponent right now was Elder Zhua from the Sacred Demon Palace. As for Garuda, they would naturally meet again later. With Garuda's departure, the hall fell silent once again. Elder Zhua slowly lifted his head, looking at Chen with an expressionless face, and said, I am in charge of punishments in the Sacred Demon Palace. Those who die by my hand will suffer countless agonies, living worse than death. So, if you end it now, I'll make your death easier. His voice was somewhat hoarse, but the malice contained within it was enough to send chills down one's spine. It was clear that Elder Zhua was not in a good mood. After all, anyone who had to pay such a price to enter the ancient heavenly palace for a mission would probably be in a foul mood as well. However, in response to Elder Zhua's ghostly tone, Chen smiled and said, looks like my luck this time is actually pretty good. This remark came from the heart, because if it had been half a day ago, encountering this situation would have meant certain death for Chen. Back then, even if he had used all his trump cards, he probably wouldn't have had the qualifications or strength to challenge Elder Zhua. But fortunately, in this half-day period, he had obtained the soul-slaughtering guards. As a result, things began to change. However, upon hearing Chen's self-reflection, Elder Zhua nodded and said, to die easily in my hands, you really are quite lucky. Evidently, he believed that Chen was sighing in gratitude for being granted an easy death, and by common reasoning, that was indeed the case. A lower Earth Supreme, someone at the so-called perfect 9th grade, even death at his hands would be considered a form of release. Chen was momentarily stunned upon hearing those words, but then he couldn't help but chuckle that a moment later, his laughter faded, replaced by an icy tone. You decrepit old fool, half-crippled as you are. If you leave now, you might still have a chance to keep that pathetic life of yours. Before the stone gate, Elders's expression seemed to freeze. It took him a while to recover, and when he did, he looked at Chen with sheer disbelief. This insignificant brat, as feeble as an ant, dared to speak to him in such a manner. Elders's face twitched slightly. Chen could see that the old man's hands were trembling, and at the same time, a terrifying surge of spiritual energy erupted from his body with an earth-shattering force. Boom! Boom! Dark cracks tore through the air within the grand hall, as though the space itself was unable to withstand the crushing impact of such terrifying spiritual energy. Under this overwhelming surge, Chen appeared as frail as a flickering flame in a raging storm. One gust, and even his bones would be reduced to dust. Chen's expression grew serious. The immense pressure made every muscle in his body sting with pain, filling him with silent dread. The power of an Earth Supreme was truly terrifying. Compared to this, a perfect 9th grade practitioner was no different from a firefly before the brilliance of the full moon. The boundless spiritual energy swept forth. Elders's face twisted into a sinister grin. I will make you suffer endless torment. Soon, you will understand. Death, even death, is a luxury beyond your reach. Clearly, Chen had thoroughly enraged him. He had originally thought that allowing Chen to take his own life was already a gift of mercy. Yet, who could have expected this foolish boy to be so ignorant of his place? Oh, is that so? However, in the face of the crushing pressure that would leave an ordinary perfect 9th grade warrior trembling in terror, Chen merely grinned. Then, an ancient military token appeared in his hand. Heh, I've long yearned to witness the power of an Earth Supreme. Never thought I'd actually get the chance today. He glanced at Elders's with a smirk. Then, the military token in his palm began to glow, and in the next instant, countless beams of light shot forth. Boom! Boom! The streams of light crashed to the ground, shattering the stone slabs of the grand hall. Amidst the swirling dust, silent figures clad in heavy armor emerged, standing tall and unwavering. As these figures appeared, waves of blood-red battle surged into the air. The sheer intensity of it completely neutralized the terrifying spiritual energy pressure that Elders had unleashed before the stone gate. Even with his composure, Elders was momentarily dumbfounded. Then, for the first time, his expression drastically changed. This is an army. His eyes trembled as he stared at the heavily armored figures in the hall, his voice breaking in astonishment. Indeed, this was an army. And not just any army. It was an elite force of the highest caliber. From the sheer power of the battle radiating from them, it was evident that they were strong enough to rival a true Earth Supreme. Why you? How do you possess an army of this caliber? Elders demanded in utter disbelief. Such a force was rare even across the entire Tianluo continent. Not even their sacred demon palace had something like this. How could a mere perfect 9th grade brat possibly own such a force? Standing before the soul-slaughtering guards, Chen felt the boundless, overwhelming battle around him. His hands, clenched into fists, trembled slightly with excitement. How many times had he dreamed of wielding such power? And now, at last, it was his. Surprised, Chen raised his head. Looking at the now visibly unsettled Elders, a mocking smile curved his lips. Elders' expression shifted repeatedly, his emotions fluctuating wildly. After a long pause, he finally let out a cold sneer. You certainly have some luck, brat. To think you'd stumble upon such an elite force. No wonder you're acting so bold. But do you truly believe that just possessing an army of this level means you can fully harness its power, you fool? Even the most powerful armies must be supported by battle formation masters of sufficient strength. Only when both are combined can the true power of battle be unleashed. To control this elite army before him, it would require a battle formation master at the level of 1,000,000 rune. Such a master is rare even in the entire Tianluo continent. And this boy, who hasn't even fully matured, clearly cannot be one of them. Is that so? However, in response to Elders' words, Mu Chen simply smiled lightly and slowly raised his hand. Seeing the smile on his face, Elder's pupils suddenly shrank, and a deep sense of unease surged in his heart. This unease, in the next instant, was completely revealed, for when Mu Chen's hand slowly rose, the terrifying army inside the hall, which even Elders found shocking, suddenly stomped their halberds forcefully. Then, a blood-red, terrifying battle began to condense above the army, as if thick blood clouds were forming that a shiver ran from the soles of Elder's feet all the way up to his crown. And the horror on his face became impossible to conceal. This moment, he finally realized. This seemingly insignificant boy really could control this terrifying army. But how is this possible? Roar. Inside the ruined hall, the 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards seemed to let out a low growl. Their blood-red battle surged like a flood, sweeping from their heads and forming an extremely thick blood cloud above them. This terrifying battle far surpassed any army Mu Chen had ever controlled. Under such a force, even an Upper Earth Supreme would not dare to underestimate it. The battle churned, and the surrounding space continued to collapse, creating dark spatial cracks that showed the overwhelming and mighty force of the battle will. Before the stone gate, the elder of the sacred demon palace looked on in shock, his previous air of superiority and indifference completely gone. He first gazed in awe at the blood cloud of battle will that now covered the entire hall, then looked in disbelief at Mu Chen, whose calm face stood behind the soul-slaughtering guards. Clearly, even now, he still couldn't believe that Mu Chen actually possessed the ability to command such an elite army. How is this possible? Elder's voice was hoarse and trembled slightly. The situation before him was changing too quickly. The insignificant ant he thought he could easily crush had, in the blink of an eye, gained a terrifying power that even made his heart race. It seems I've disappointed you. This army, I can control it just fine, Mu Chen said, looking at the elder, whose face kept changing from shock to disbelief. Mu Chen couldn't help but laugh lightly, his heart also stirring with excitement that in the past, if Mu Chen had encountered an Upper Earth Supreme, his only option would have been to flee as fast as possible. Yet now, as he revealed his trump card, he could see the look of fear on the face of an Upper Earth Supreme. Mu Chen glanced at the ancient military token in his hand, gripping it tightly. Although he currently relied on the soul-slaughtering guards to contend with an Upper Earth Supreme, he was confident that before long, he would possess the strength he had longed for, strength of his own. Now, Elder, do you still plan to stop me? Mu Chen asked, smiling at Elder Zhua. Boy, don't get cocky. What scenes have I not seen? Do you think you can drive me off with just an army? You're being too naive. And, who knows if you're just pretending to be calm? Elder's eyes darkened as he spoke in a sinister tone. Although he was shocked by Mu Chen's trump card, he was, after all, a true Upper Earth Supreme. There was no way he would retreat just because of a few words from Mu Chen. Since that's the case, Mu Chen smiled slightly and said, Then I ask this elder to test the power of my soul-slaughtering guards and see just how strong they are. Boom! As his voice fell, he stepped forward and appeared directly within the soul-slaughtering guards, sitting cross-legged. His eyes closed slightly, and his consciousness surged out, merging with the vast blood cloud that gathered around him. Roar! Roar! Mu Chen's consciousness fused with the battle will of the soul-slaughtering guards, and instantly, the roar of battle filled his mind at the same time. He felt a terrifying power surrounding his consciousness, entirely under his control. Boom! The thick blood cloud rolled as a massive blood wave surged out as it swept across. The space cracked open, and it pressed down toward Elder Zhua in a crushing manner. This attack, though seemingly simple, could only be truly felt by those standing at the front. The sheer force of the blood wave was so overwhelming that it was impossible to resist. Mu Chen estimated that if Garuda, Zhu Yin, and the others were in front, the blood wave would pass, and they wouldn't even leave behind any bones for that. Blood wave was formed by the terrifying battle will of the soul-slaughtering guards. The blood wave surged toward his eyes, rolling forward. Elder's face grew exceptionally serious. He could sense the terrifying power within the blood wave, and even he dared not underestimate it. This brat, Elderswa gritted his teeth. He had initially thought it would be an easy victory, but now the situation had become so chaotic. How could this not make Elderswa furious? Elderswa's hand stretched out from his sleeve, his skin as smooth as an infant's. Between his 5 fingers, a jade-like luster shimmered. His palm reached out and seemed to grow larger as if it was being blown by the wind in an instant. It turned into a gigantic hand 1,000 feet in size, pressing down to crush the space itself, and with one strike, it collided with the rolling blood wave. Boom! The two forces clashed violently, and instantly, the stone pillars in the great hall, resembling towering columns, shattered into pieces. Visible ripples spread out, distorting and breaking the space. This seemingly casual clash unleashed destructive power far beyond that of a peak 9th grade expert wielding their divine ability. The terrifying spiritual energy shockwave swept through the hall, and Elderswa's body shuddered slightly. Taking a step back, his face darkened with a grim expression. Clearly, in the earlier exchange, he had subtly found himself at a disadvantage if he were in his prime. He would naturally have no fear of Mu Chun and the soul-slaughtering guards. Whether to fight or retreat, he could do as he pleased. But, right now, having paid a huge price to enter the ancient heavenly palace, his strength was not even half of what it had been at his peak. Thus, if they truly fought, he might not be able to withstand such terrifying battle will. Boom! Boom! Mu Chun, sensing the terrifying power of the battle will, was not satisfied. The strength was clearly something he greatly desired and longed for. With a flick of his sleeve, the heavy blood cloud surged, and countless blood-red battle-intent spears materialized. The battle-intent spears were covered with densely packed battle runes. Upon a quick glance, there were at least hundreds of thousands of them. The power within each spear was enough to make a peak 9th grade expert tremble in fear. Go! Mu Chun flicked his finger, and immediately, the countless battle-intent spears shot out like a rain of arrows, sweeping toward Elderswa. Heaven and earth phenomenon. The blood-red light pierced through the void, seemingly ignoring the distance and space. Elderswa dared not be careless that he stamped his foot, shouted, and the spiritual energy in the surroundings began to rapidly gather that it condensed before him into a massive mountain peak. This mountain peak was crystal clear and shimmered with a rainbow of colors that it was formed from the purest spiritual energy between heaven and earth. A true manifestation, like creating a spiritual energy mountain out of nothing. Such a feat could only be achieved by someone of the Earth's supreme level. Clang, clang, clang. The spiritual energy mountain acted as a barrier, blocking the incoming battle-intent spears. The it successfully fended off all of them. However, when all the spears fell, the nearly tangible spiritual energy mountain was left riddled with holes, and finally, it exploded, scattering into countless spiritual energy light points. How dare you be so arrogant? Do you really think I can't suppress you? As Mu Chun launched a relentless series of attacks, Elderswa's face turned as cold as water. With a sneer, his jade-like hand flicked, and his other hand pointed sharply as he flicked his hand. Mu Chun felt as if the world itself was shrinking in the darkness of the void. An endless, invisible jade pillar descended from the heavens, aiming directly at Mu Chun, who was protected by the soul-slaughtering guards. The force behind the attack was overwhelmingly powerful. Without the protection of the soul-slaughtering guards, Mu Chun knew he would have no escape. He would be turned to ashes under that single finger. Heh, if you were at your peak, it would have been hard to defeat you today. But in your current state, what makes you think you can fight me? Mu Chun lifted his head and stared directly at the descending jade pillar, which he knew was a transformation of Elderswa's finger. He took a deep breath, the next moment, his eyes turned blood-red. With a roar that sounded like thunder, he shouted, "Soul-slaughtering guards, kill!" Boom. 2,000 soul-slaughtering guards suddenly opened their eyes. They lifted their heads and gazed at the endless jade pillar, their eyes flashing with blood-red battle intent. Their battle will surged outward, transforming into 2,000 formidable waves of energy, sweeping through the void. Bang! The blood-red battle intent roared, and the endless jade pillar shattered instantly. The darkness that had enveloped the sky and earth dissipated rapidly. Mu Chun found himself back in the hall, realizing that the previous dark scene was like an illusion. When he looked at Elder Zwa, he saw that the latter's finger was trembling slightly, with a faint trace of crimson blood emerging. A single finger could encompass the entire world, blocking all senses and leaving no escape. Such a technique was indeed worthy of being called Earth Supreme. A deep trace of envy flickered in Mu Chen's eyes. If not for the overwhelming dominance of the soul-slaughtering guard's battle intent, he knew he would never have escaped that deadly finger. In just this brief exchange, he had experienced the true strength of the Earth Supreme. Such power was beyond the reach of even the perfect ninth grade. But it was about time. Mu Chen licked his lips, smiling lightly at Elder Zwa. Although I would love to experience the might of an Earth Supreme a little longer, my time is valuable that I can't play with you anymore. He bit his finger, and crimson blood flowed down his fingertip. He moved his hand through the air, drawing an ancient blood rune in the void. Soul-slaughtering battle formation. The blood rune fell into the thick, blood-red clouds of battle intent above the soul-slaughtering guards, and in an instant, countless streaks of blood light shot out. These blood lights gradually coalesced into a massive, terrifying blood-red battle formation. When Elder Zwa saw the blood-red battle formation, his face turned pale. From the formation, he sensed an aura of death. Swish! Countless streaks of blood light shot through the air like lightning, firing out from the thick blood cloud above the soul-slaughtering guards. These beams pierced through the void, linking together and emanating a terrifying fluctuation. Mu Chen's expression grew serious. His hand gestures changed rapidly, as streams of formidable battle intent transformed into blood light that continued to coalesce. Above the hall, these lights began to form a gigantic formation. It was a battle formation unique to the soul-slaughtering guards, named the Soul-Slaughtering Battle Formation. Mu Chen was no stranger to this formation. The 8 Earth Supremes who were eradicated by the soul-slaughtering guards all perished within this formation. This revealed just how terrifying it was. Though the soul-slaughtering guards were no longer at their peak, the current state of Elder Zwa was far weaker than the Earth Supremes who had been wiped out. Thus, when the blood-red light flooded the hall, and the terrifying formation began to take shape, Elder Zwa's face grew even darker. His eyelids twitched, and deep in his eyes, a trace of shock appeared. The situation before him had far exceeded his expectations. He never imagined that the rabbit he had once considered easy prey could suddenly turn into a man-eating tiger. The blood-red battle formation before him emitted a deathly aura, and today, if he wasn't careful, he might truly fall here. And when he thought of this, Elder Zwa couldn't help but feel an incredible sense of absurdity. He had been cornered to the brink of death by a mere child at the perfect 9th grade. However, no matter how absurd it felt to him, he knew that if he didn't act soon, he would really fall here, carrying that absurdity with him. "You brat, you truly go too far." Elder Zwa bellowed in fury. He then stomped his foot, and in an instant, an overwhelming surge of terrifying spiritual energy erupted from his body. Spiritual energy gathered and formed a powerful shadow behind him, a force that seemed to reach the sky while firmly planting its feet on the ground. As this shadow exhaled and inhaled, clouds and mist swirled around it, suppressing the entire world at this moment. Mu Chen looked at the massive shadow, his expression changing slightly. He could sense that this shadow was likely the supreme dharma form cultivated by Elder Zwa. After the supreme dharma form appeared, Elder Zwa suddenly let out a low growl. His mouth opened wide, and an unbelievable sight unfolded. The giant shadow was actually swallowed whole by him. Elder Zwa had swallowed his own supreme dharma form. Boom! Boom! Just as Mu Chen was struck with shock, Elder Zwa's body began to swell up, growing into a towering giant. In just a few breaths, he had become a colossus standing 1,000 zhang tall. His massive body was covered in spiritual energy runes, each one formed from condensed, potent spiritual power. Whoosh! Elder Zwa stood amidst the heavens and earth. As he inhaled and exhaled, clouds and mist were born. Within the clouds, fierce winds and thunder roared. At this moment, Elder Zwa seemed to be the master of the world, capable of creating anything, exuding a profound and mystical aura. So this is the supreme dharma form that only those who reach Earth Supreme can cultivate. Mu Chen gazed at Elder Zhua's giant form, unable to stop himself from taking a deep breath. It was said that upon reaching Earth Supreme, the supreme dharma form would gradually change. The physical body and the dharma body would merge, and the result would no longer be just a dharma body but a dharma form. And the supreme dharma form follows the command of the spoken word. Spiritual energy deprivation. Elder Zhua pointed at Mu Chen and roared. A mysterious ripple spread throughout the world, and Mu Chen suddenly felt that the spiritual energy around him seemed to reject him. He couldn't draw any spiritual energy from the surrounding world. So this is the power of the Earth Supreme's words become law. Mu Chen's expression grew grim, that if he were just an ordinary perfect ninth grade, this one word from Elder Zhua would have put him in a hopeless situation. The gap between Earth Supreme and the perfect ninth grade was indeed immense. However, fortunately, Mu Chen hadn't relied on his own spiritual power for this battle. What he was depending on was the battle will of the soul-slaughtering guards. Clearly, with Elder Zhua's power, it was still impossible for him to strip away the battle will of the soul-slaughtering guards. Thunder. Elder Zhua bellowed once again, and immediately, countless thunderbolts, like giant dragons, roared through the heavens and earth. They appeared out of nowhere, carrying destructive power as they violently rushed toward Mu Chen. Facing such a furious assault, Mu Chen didn't dare to hesitate. He immediately activated his battle will, forming layers of defense like a turtle shell, protecting the still-forming soul-slaughtering battle formation. Boom, boom, boom. The violent strikes relentlessly fell, causing the layers of blood cloud battle will to retreat. However, the blood cloud continued to surge out, stubbornly resisting. Wind, fire, mountain. Elder Zhua unleashed even more violent attacks. The spiritual energy in the entire world was stirred up, forming a terrifying wind and fire assault that ravaged toward Mu Chen with a destructive force. Under such an attack, the blood-red battle will began to retreat step by step. However, even as the blood-red battle will retreated, Mu Chen's eyes didn't show much panic. Because the soul-slaughtering battle formation had finally started to take shape in Elder Zhua's current state, even with the power of the supreme dharma form, he could not break through the protection of the soul-slaughtering guard's battle will. Elder Zhua clearly realized this, as his face grew darker with bitterness and raged. He hadn't expected that even after summoning the supreme dharma form, he still couldn't crush Mu Chen. The devastating onslaught between heaven and earth gradually began to weaken at this moment. Mu Chen lifted his head, his gaze cold as he looked at Elder Zhua. With a wave of his sleeve, the layers of blood clouds surrounding the area instantly dispersed, revealing a blood-red battle formation that had fully formed and was beginning to emanate a fierce, malevolent aura. If one comes, one must reciprocate. It would be improper otherwise. Elder Zhua, allow me to show you the power of my battle formation, Mu Chen said with a faint smile. Yet, there was little warmth in his eyes. He clenched his 5 fingers tightly, and immediately, the blood-red battle formation erupted with an overwhelming bloodlight, soaring upwards and turning the entire sky a deep crimson. The bloodlight spread rapidly, soon engulfing Elder Zhua. Once within the coverage of the battle formation, Mu Chen planned to unleash its full might and let its power explode. The bloodlight rapidly expanded in Elder Zhua's eyes, and his expression became increasingly uncertain. After a few breaths, he suddenly took a deep breath, and his massive body shrank instantaneously, returning to its normal size. Then, he stomped his foot, and the surrounding space immediately twisted. His figure transformed into a streak of light, shooting upwards with incredible speed. Boom! The ceiling of the great hall was shattered, and Mu Chen stood dumbfounded, watching as the streak of light vanished from his sight at an astonishing pace. That Elder Zhua actually escaped. Mu Chen stared in disbelief. Wasn't that a Earth Supreme? Did he just run away like that? He stood stunned for a long time, before gradually snapping back to his senses. A feeling of frustration surged within him. He had just displayed the soul-slaughtering guard's trump card and was ready to fight, only for Elder Zhua to decisively choose to flee. It felt like hitting cotton with a punch. Truly decisive, Mu Chen sighed, giving only this evaluation. These Earth Supremes really were quick to make decisions. As soon as the situation shifted slightly, they opted for the most rational course of action. Elder Zhua, in such a poor state, would have likely suffered a cost if he continued to fight. But the greatest loss would certainly have been his own life. It was even possible that he might have perished here. Thus, after a brief moment of weighing his options, Elder Zhua had chosen his life over the mission without hesitation. Even if he were to be punished by Lu Heng later, his life would be spared. But here, Mu Chun might very well take his life. It's a bit of a shame. Mu Chun murmured, shaking his head regretfully. He had been quite eager to see just how powerful the soul-slaughtering battle formation could be once fully unleashed. However, that sentiment was fleeting, and he quickly breathed a sigh of relief. After all, fighting to the death with an Earth Supreme was no easy feat. The old man's rational retreat was actually a good outcome for Mu Chen Tio, forced a retreat from a lower Earth Supreme. If word of this spread across the Tianluo continent, Mu Chen's reputation would undoubtedly be unmatched. Mu Chen sighed again and waved his sleeve, causing the blood-red battle will to dissipate. He then raised his military token, recalling the soul-slaughtering guards. His figure moved, and he appeared before the stone gate. Behind this gate was the place where the mandala flower's main body should be. Mu Chen paused for a moment, then tensed his body and, without further hesitation, extended both hands. Slowly, he began to push open the ancient stone gate, which had been sealed for countless years. The gate creaked open. An ancient, weathered aura rushed out to meet him. Light poured through the crack in the gate, and Mu Chen's gaze immediately followed, focusing on the end of the ruined plaza. There, he saw a pitch-black, ink-like ancient enchanting flower. The heavy stone gate creaked open, light stretching in through the gap, and the sights beyond the gate gradually came into Mu Chen's view. Beyond the stone gate was a grand hall that had clearly been ravaged by fierce battles. Inside was a vast plaza, lined with towering stone pillars. The ground was cracked deeply, and though it appeared to have been reinforced by a spirit array, it had been thoroughly destroyed. Inside the grand hall, several skeletal remains could still be seen, glowing faintly, with a white radiance. Among them, a few bones emanated an oppressive aura, so powerful that even after thousands of years, they still seemed to exude an overwhelming force. Clearly, these were once beings of immense strength. The entire plaza was in a state of tragic devastation. However, at this moment, Mu Chun paid little attention to the destruction of the ruined plaza. His gaze immediately fixed on the far end of the plaza, where a lotus platform carved from blood jade stood. That on this platform, a flower, as black as ink and exceedingly radiant, quietly drooped its head. Around the flower, a circle of eerie light radiated. This light was incredibly dark, as if it could swallow the very light around it. Within this shadowy glow, numerous ancient runes emerged, highlighting the flower's extraordinary and mystical nature. Mu Chen's eyes locked onto the alluring flower. That he knew that this flower was the true form of the mandala, the legendary ancient mandala flower. Finally found it. Mu Chun stared at the beguiling flower, then sighed deeply, relieved. As long as he took the true form of the mandala with him, he no longer had to worry about what the Xia Emperor might do to him. Despite the mandala being right in front of him, Mu Chun did not rush forward recklessly. The moment he entered, he had sensed a lethal spirit array hidden within the plaza. His gaze swept across the area and paused at the base of 8 stone pillars. Beneath these pillars sat 8 skeletal remains, devoid of any life, nothing but ordinary white bones. But Mu Chun knew that the positions of these skeletal remains marked the core of the spirit array. In other words, they were the power source of the array. This spirit array is not any weaker than the complete 9 dragons devouring immortal array. Mu Chen's face grew serious. In his perception, the array appeared calm, but any rash intrusion would trigger a destructive offensive. Under such an assault, even an Upper Earth Supreme would be at risk of perishing. No wonder the mandala chose this place to hide. Otherwise, it might not have been able to fend off Lu Heng. Mu Chen sighed helplessly. But at the time, this spirit array had not only blocked Lu Heng, but also kept him outside. This indicated that at that time, both the mandala and Lu Heng were likely only at the upper Earth Supreme leveled. Mu Chen's gaze remained fixed on the spirit array that enveloped the plaza. After a brief silence, he sat down at the array's edge, closed his eyes slightly, and began to sense the array before him. Starting his exploration, and no matter how strong this spirit array was, he had to crack it. Otherwise, the mandala, which seemed so close, would have to be abandoned. Mu Chen closed his eyes. His spiritual energy perception spread, gradually mapping out the vast array structure in his mind. The outline of the array began to take form. This array was majestic and profound, exuding a strong sense of power that sent shivers down his spine. Clearly, this was an array of intermediate grandmaster level. Previously, when Mu Chen was in the second hall, he had been able to easily break the 9 dragons devouring immortal array because he had obtained a fragmented diagram of the array and had spent a long time studying it. This allowed him to exploit the array's weaknesses and take control of it. But now, this was an unfamiliar grandmaster-level array to Mu Chen. Thus, it was clearly impossible to break it in a short time. However, Mu Chen did not grow impatient. Instead, he calmed himself and began to probe every detail of the array, and no matter what. To break the array, he had to understand it thoroughly. Only then could he pinpoint the array's weakest point. Mu Chen sat in meditation. The ruined hall fell back into an ancient stillness, an aura of time-worn decay lingering in the air, evoking a sense of Mu Chen's eyes remained closed for an entire day. During this time, his body was as motionless as a rock, while spiritual light swirled around him. The spiritual light gathered before him, gradually forming a model of the spirit array. However, this model was incomplete from the start, constantly shattering and reforming as Mu Chen painstakingly rebuilt it each time it broke apart. The spirit array model in front of him was evidently the powerful spirit array that enveloped the entire plaza. Mu Chen tried to deduce and find any flaws. Time quietly passed in the silent hall, and nearly half a day had gone by. Suddenly, the spiritual light in front of Mu Chen flared up. The light surged. A highly complex spirit array model materialized in its entirety. Though it was just a model, there was an astonishing fluctuation emanating from it. Mu Chen, with his eyes tightly shut, slowly opened them. A hint of exhaustion flickered in his eyes. These past 2 days of deductions had been more tiring for him than the fierce battle against Elder Zhua, even though he had poured all his strength into it. However, Mu Chen knew that now was not the time to rest. He immediately suppressed his weariness and focused on the spirit array model in front of him. A strange light appeared in his eyes. As expected, this is truly a mid-level grandmaster spirit array. It's incredibly complex. Mu Chen sighed. Just deducing the model in front of him had drained all his energy. If he truly wanted to set up the array, it would likely drain him completely without success. The spirit array required millions of spirit seals, and the connections between them were so intricate that even a slight misstep would cause the array to collapse. The difficulty of setting it up was unimaginable. However, this deduction was not without gain. Mu Chen's gaze shifted to the enormous spirit array above the plaza. During his earlier deduction, he had realized that, in order to break the array, apart from using brute strength to forcefully break through, the only other option was to destroy its core. His gaze turned to the skeletal remains seated beneath the 8 stone pillars. The power of the spirit array came from them, and their connection formed an extraordinarily balanced link, making the array incredibly powerful. Because of this balance, no matter from which direction Mu Chen attempted to forcibly break through, he would provoke a counterattack from the 8 skeletons. If he could destroy this balance, the spirit array, uncontrolled, would become disordered due to the discord in spiritual energy. At that time, he would have a chance. It sounded easy, but it was incredibly difficult to achieve. After all, as soon as Mu Chen showed any signs of attack, the array would undoubtedly retaliate fiercely, and that kind of retaliation, even with the soul-slaughtering guards, he would be unable to endure. So, he had to break the balance without triggering the spirit array's counterattack. Mu Chen frowned, his eyes flashing with light. He wore a thoughtful expression, clearly contemplating how to disrupt the balance. I can't directly attack the array, or it will trigger a counterattack. The balance of the spirit array comes from the control at its core. Right now, the core consists of the 8 skeletal remains and the stone pillars behind them. The skeletons are the source of spiritual energy, and the stone pillars serve as the channels to connect the array. So, if I can separate the skeletons from the stone pillars, the balance will be broken. Mu Chen suddenly raised his head, his eyes glowing. He fixed his gaze on the 8 stone pillars and the skeletal remains, carefully analyzing their positions. After a while, a faint smile appeared on his youthful face. He gently stomped his foot on the ground, feeling the hardness beneath. He smiled lightly. So it's actually this simple. With that, Mu Chen began to retreat. He waved his sleeve, and the military token appeared. As the bloodlight surged, the soul-slaughtering guards reappeared, and a wave of blood-red battle intent swept out. Mu Chen fused his will with the battle intent of the soul-slaughtering guards, immediately activating it. Roar! The soul-slaughtering guards let out a low growl, and a massive blood-red cloud surged into the air, transforming into a giant blood-red serpent. The serpent's body was covered in countless flashing battle runes. The serpent roared and suddenly dove down, its momentum terrifying. However, the target of the serpent's charge was not the spirit array, but a corner of the plaza to the northwest. Boom! The serpent struck down with immense force, causing the entire grand hall to tremble. Although the ground here had been tempered by spiritual energy, making it as hard as iron, it was still blasted into a massive crater by the violent strike of the soul-slaughtering guards. The air was thick with smoke, but Mu Chen didn't look at the massive pit. Instead, his gaze was fixed firmly on a stone pillar in the plaza. From the impact on the ground here, it seemed that some force ripple could be transmitted, and the stone pillar in that direction was the perfect spot to receive the ripple. Mu Chen's plan was simple. Since he couldn't directly attack the spirit array, he would strike from the outside, transmitting the power to enter the array. However, this method of power transmission would be extremely weak due to the spirit array's barrier. But if it proved effective, with persistence, even the weakest force could eventually achieve the desired effect. Though the idea seemed simple, it required a thorough understanding of the spirit array structure. Only then could the force ripples bypass the areas of intense spiritual energy, because recklessly transmitting the power would be futile. So, Mu Chen focused intently on the skeletal remains beneath the stone pillar, calculating the time it would take for the force to reach. Around 8 breaths later, Mu Chen's pupils, locked on the remains, suddenly contracted. He saw it. The ancient skeletal remains, seated under the stone pillar for countless years, had just trembled imperceptibly, and its position had shifted forward ever so slightly. That tiny movement was almost negligible, but Mu Chen couldn't help but grin that he knew it. He had found the way to break the spirit array.